Okay, so we're going to go over the layout 1 process, and I'm going to go a little bit fast, but you can pause this video as we go. So I've already created a folder on my desktop called layout 1, but as with all projects, we need to define the site first in Dreamweaver. So I'm going to choose new site and call this layout number 1. And remember, because it's not a file name or a folder name, it's just an indicator for our drop down here. We can do capitals and spaces, etc. So now I need to drive to that folder, and mine is on my desktop, and I'm looking for the layout 1. Notice this has no capitals, no spaces, no special characters because it is a folder or a file name. So now I'll choose that folder and then click save. So now it's going to define that site, and it'll say that site up here, and it's driving directly to that root folder, which is exactly what we want. So I need to create an HTML file and a CSS to start. So I'll go to File, New, and choose HTML document. And I want this to be my last name, layout number 1. And I don't have a CSS right now, so I don't want to attach it. I'll just click Create. And once I create that that HTML file, remember it's not saved, it's untitled. So we need to go to File, Save As, so that way all the file paths are going to be correct. So we need to make sure that it's going into the site root folder. So you can always hit site root. On a Mac, you'll have to drop this down, but it should automatically be going to that site root because we've defined the site in Dreamweaver. So then we know that we are going to get the correct file paths. So this is index.html because it's just the only page we're using for this site, and then click save. All right, I'm going to close that. And last, we need to create a CSS that we can then tie to the page. So we'll go to CSS, create, and it's going to, again, be an untitled document, file, save as, and then type styles.css and put it in the layout 1. And there we go. So now when I come back, I can actually close the styles.css because we're not going to hand code this CSS. And I'm actually going to go to design view and take that split off because we just want to see the one page. Actually, we're going to go back. I just messed that up. So I'm going to go to code and just be in the actual code, not the CSS. But if we go to CSS Designer, here's where we can add a source. So you might have a different, it sometimes has a little button here saying connect to CSS, but we'll hit plus and do create a new CSS file. So we'll browse, and again, it should be going right to our root folder, but you should again click site root just in case, or if you're not sure. So we'll go ahead and type, actually, I didn't want to create a new CSS, so I'm going to attach an existing CSS file because I already created it. So I'm going to browse and see how it wasn't going to my site folder. That's not good. So I think it should be fine. We're just going to do that. But it's going to be a link, and there we go. So we'll click OK, and now it is attached. Now we're not going to mess with media, but we're going to do a lot with selectors. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up and move this up so that I have much more room for my CSS selectors. So I want more room for my properties, and there we go. So what we're going to do in this particular video, once we have it all set up at this point, is we are going to look to the wireframe that we previously created, and we are going to create the structure. And what I do is I look at that wireframe and I go from kind of the top down and left to right. So look at the wireframe that we created, and then go to your insert panel. And remember, if you can't see any of the panels like the properties, the insert, the CSS designer, you can always find them in the window menu. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put everything in body because body is what everybody is looking at. So we're going to hit enter return and have body sitting in there. And I think I need to change the font so this is a little bit bigger. So let's see, let's do largest and click apply. There we go. So that should help you to see this a little bit better. So we need the wrapper around our site, which is going to allow us to sit our site in the middle and have it not be full width. So we need to create a div for that because there's not a structure tag in here called wrapper. So we're going to create a div, and when I click on it, it's going to ask me what is the class or an ID. Remember, a class is if you have multiple things that are going to be styled in this way, or an ID is when it's only one thing that's going to be styled in this way and it's unique. So we only have one wrapper on our page. There are actually some sites that have multiple wrappers, so they might have a class, but we want to put our ID. Now, I don't know if this is going to work on my Mac at home, but I've noticed in my computer lab at the college that when I'm on a PC and I type an ID in here, it works. And for some reason, the Mac, even though it's Adobe Dreamweaver 2018, this doesn't work. So let me show you the two ways you can do this. So the easiest way is to give this the name of wrapper. Don't put the hashtag right here because that's only when we're actually in CSS. This is where we're just going to name this div specifically as a wrapper. So we'll click OK. And notice that with a Mac, it doesn't put ID equals wrapper. Now, if you're on a PC, it does, and you shouldn't have to do anything. But if you're on a Mac, you now have to come in here and type ID and then type wrapper. So you have to add that attribute yourself. And hopefully by the time you're watching this video, they fixed that quirk. But if not, there you go. Another thing you can do, I'm going to undo that. If you're on a Mac, or maybe you do have this error and you're on a PC. But I like to have this properties panel up. And what I do with that is when I add a div, I'm just going to click to add a div and then click OK. I'm not going to add anything. And then I'm going to click down here on this div. And right here you have this ID section. And this is where I can type wrapper and then click off and it'll put that attribute in there for me. So inside of the wrappers where we're going to have all of the content of our site. So we actually don't need this filler text right now. We'll need it for everything else, but there we go. Now this is going to get separated by a lot of content, so I do like to put an HTML comment here saying close of the wrapper div. So that way I know what this pairs up with. So now if I click in here, if I'm looking at my wireframe from the top down, we had a logo. So we don't really have a logo in here, and we could do a div called logo, and that would be perfectly acceptable. I do consider the logo part of the header, so I'm just going to put header in this particular instance. And I don't know why I'm having to click this twice, but if you are to, just roll with it. So we're not going to have any other header in here, and so we don't really need to give it a special name. We're just going to put the header like that. And we do want to have the content in there just because otherwise we wouldn't be able to see the invisible box that the header creates without some actual text typed in there. All right, so once we have the header, right underneath it, we have the navigation. So we're going to click and add the navigation. Again, it's the only navigation on the simple site. So we'll click nav. And then we have underneath that a slider, and we don't have a slideshow structure anywhere in here. So anytime you don't have structure, you should use the div tag. And you should use the div tag in conjunction with an ID that indicates what is that div about, because how would we tell the difference between the wrapper and the slider? So we'll go ahead and click OK because I'm on a Mac. Click that div, go to ID, and type slider. And you could call it slideshow, slider, header image, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so underneath the slideshow, we have two things sitting left and right. We have the main, which is going to be about 2/3 of the width of the site, and the aside, so the sidebar for events, that's going to be about 1/3 the width of the site. So we're going to start again, top to bottom and left to right. So main is on the left right now. So we are going to hit main and then click OK. And then to the right of that is the aside, so the sidebar, and we can click OK. Now again, this sidebar is called, we're not going to give it a unique name, but if we had two sidebars or maybe two sidebars on the same side, but they stack, we might have one aside and give it an ID of events and another aside and give it an ID of social. So just know that if you're going to have more than one of these structure tags, it would be a good idea to give them a unique ID. Okay, so there we go. And then underneath that, I believe we have the footer. And it's important to have the footer A for copyright purposes, B because you have two floating things and the footer is going to make it so that the bottom of your site sits underneath those floated elements. So we'll go ahead and click OK. In the next video, we're going to talk about, if I go over to design, now you just see a bunch of empty squares that don't really sit right. So I will show you how to do the CSS to start building your site, but with some kind of garish colors.